The babies were screaming. All three of them. At the same time. The kind of screaming that tears through walls, rattles windows, and strips every last nerve raw. Soren Ashford pressed them tighter against his chest. All three, both arms, every muscle in his body burning. And he rocked. Back and forth. Back and forth. His lips moved with words that had no sound left in them. His throat was gone. His body was 3 days past empty. And then the door opened. And every single one of them went silent. Not because the room felt safer. Because it didn't. Something had shifted in the air. Soren felt it before he heard the footsteps. Before he saw the shadow stretch across the pale nursery floor. His chest locked up. His arms tightened around the babies without permission. Pure reflex, pure animal, the kind of response that doesn't wait for the brain to catch up. The 3 infants lay still against him. Their tiny mouths open but soundless now, like even they understood that crying was the wrong move. Hi viewers, have you ever been so exhausted and terrified at the same time that your body just stopped choosing between the two? Soren's back hit the wall. He hadn't meant to move. His legs just did it, retreated, compressed, made him small. The babies shifted in his arms, and one of them, the smallest, the one he called Juno in his head because she always looked like she was judging the world, blinked up at him with wide dark eyes. She didn't cry. She watched. Soren's whole body was shaking now. Not from cold. The room was warm enough. He was shaking because he recognized what had entered. Not the face. Not the voice. Not even the footstep pattern. He recognized it the way a body recognizes danger before the mind accepts it. Through the air itself, through the shift in pressure, through something that lived deep in his instincts and had never, in all these months, been wrong. Alpha. Not just any alpha. Powerful one. The footsteps stopped just outside the nursery door. Heavy. Measured. Patient. Soren pulled the babies closer and pressed his lips to the top of the nearest head. The boy, Caden, the one who always smelled like rain somehow, and he breathed once. Slow. Controlled. The kind of breath that doesn't fix anything but at least keeps you standing. Sometimes danger doesn't arrive loudly. It changes the air first. It doesn't announce. It arrives, and the room reorganizes itself around the fact of it. Soren had been hiding for 7 months in this mansion. 7 months as the maid. 7 months of bleach and silence and carefully constructed invisibility. He wore suppressants when he could get them. He kept his head down. He cleaned rooms that were never really dirty and carried trays to people who never really looked at him. That was the point. Don't be seen. Don't be smelled. Don't be real. He'd given birth alone in the lower-level bathroom 3 nights ago. No doctor. No help. No sound. Just him and the cold tile and 3 small lives that came into the world as quietly as he could manage. He'd wrapped them in the softest cloths he could find. Spare linens from the East Wing supply closet, the ones nobody ever counted, and he'd moved them up here to the secondary nursery. The room that nobody used. The room that wasn't on the household schedule. The room where, for 3 days, he thought he'd been invisible. He thought wrong. One of the babies, Lena, the middle one, the loud one, shifted in his arms. Her tiny fist found his collar and gripped. And outside the door, the footsteps didn't move. They just waited. Soren's shaking got worse. Because whoever was standing on the other side of that door wasn't confused. Wasn't passing through. Wasn't a servant checking a noise complaint. They were standing exactly where they meant to stand, and they weren't moving until they were ready. And Soren's body, exhausted, post-birth, hormonally unstable, scent barely contained. His body already knew who it was. That was the worst part. Not the fear. The recognition. The door handle turned. Turned slowly. Like it had all the time in the world. Soren's breath stopped in his chest. He pressed himself harder into the corner. The 3 babies stacked carefully against him. And he watched the handle rotate with the kind of focus a person only finds when everything else has been stripped away. No more thoughts. No more plans. Just the handle. Just the gap of light widening at the door's edge. Then it stopped. The handle released. Footsteps moved away down the hall. Slow. Deliberate. Like they'd made a decision. Soren didn't breathe for another full minute. When he finally did, it came out broken, half gasp, half collapse, and he slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor with his back pressed to the plaster and 3 sleeping newborns across his lap and chest. His hands were still shaking. His whole body felt like it had been wrung out. This was his life now. This exact thing. This corner. This fear. This floor. He hadn't always lived like this. That was the part that still surprised him sometimes. Not the fall itself, but how complete it had been. How total. How the world had taken everything and left him here, in a mansion he wasn't supposed to exist in, raising 3 children who weren't supposed to exist either. He'd come to this household 7 months ago. Desperation looks like a lot of things, and that time it looked like a false name on a work application and a forged scent suppression clearance. He wasn't legal here. Omegas without registered status couldn't be employed in private residences. That was the law, and this household followed the law in public and ignored it everywhere else, which is how places like this always worked. They needed labor that wouldn't talk. He needed shelter that wouldn't ask. It worked. For 7 months, it worked. He learned the schedule of every servant, every guard rotation, every room inspection. He learned which hallways were empty at what hours. He learned to move through this house like a ghost. Early morning, late night, mid-shift, the small gaps between attention. He ate alone. He slept in rotation, 2-hour windows, always dressed, always ready to move. He'd been careful. He'd been so careful. For days ago, before the birth, before the sleepless nights, before everything. A senior maid named Darlene had come up to the east corridor at the wrong time. Soren had been carrying a bundle of linens with both hands, moving quickly, and Darlene had rounded the corner with no warning and stopped dead. Her eyes went straight to the linens, then to his midsection, then back to the linens. She hadn't said anything, but she'd looked too long. Soren had smiled, said he was restocking, kept walking. His heart had been in his throat for 6 hours straight. She hadn't reported it. Or maybe she had, and this, right now, tonight, was the result. He looked down at the 3 faces in his arms. Caden, Lena, Juno. 3 days old and already perfectly themselves. Caden, heavy and warm, always frowning slightly, like the world had already inconvenienced him. Lena, restless even in sleep, small fingers always moving. Juno, still and watchful. Her dark eyes open more than they should be for a newborn, studying everything. He'd named them in his head. He hadn't meant to. Names made them more real, and more real meant harder, and harder was something he couldn't afford. But he'd done it anyway on the second night in the dark when all 3 of them were crying and he was so tired he thought he might actually disappear, and he'd said the names out loud quietly just to give himself something to hold on to. It worked. They were real. That meant he couldn't run. He'd thought about it. Several times in the last 3 days, the part of his brain that ran on pure survival had drawn up a map. Leave the mansion tonight. Take the back road. Get to the transit line by dawn. Disappear again. He knew how to disappear, he'd done it before. But you can't disappear with 3 newborns. 3 newborns cry. 3 newborns need warmth and feeding and things he couldn't provide on a cold road in the middle of the night. So he'd stayed. And something had found him anyway. The door handle had turned. Now, sitting on the floor of a borrowed room in a house that didn't know his name, Soren pressed his lips to Caden's forehead and closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he heard it again. Footsteps. Back down the hall. Closer this time. And this time there was more than one set. 40 minutes earlier, Demarian Velkier had been doing nothing. That was the word for it. Nothing. Sitting in the upper floor lounge of his downtown penthouse, one ankle crossed over his knee, a glass of something expensive he hadn't touched sitting on the table beside him. The city spread out below the floor-to-ceiling glass, all light and distance and motion, and he watched it the way powerful men watch things they own. Without urgency. Without need. Across from him, Rashid Cole lounged sideways across an armchair like it was a throne he'd borrowed. Rashid was an alpha too. Built wide and loud, The kind of man who announced himself in every room and liked that about himself. He'd been talking for 20 minutes about a deal in the harbor district. Contracts, territory lines, a rival group that needed handling. Velkier had been listening. Mostly. The kind of listening that processes words and files them correctly but leaves the rest of the mind completely elsewhere. Rashid noticed. He always noticed, which was why Velkier kept him close. Men who noticed things were either useful or dangerous, and Rashid was both, which was the most interesting kind. "You're not here," Rashid said. "I'm here. You're somewhere else, and you've been there since Tuesday." Velkier didn't answer. Rashid let it sit for a moment, then reached forward and picked up his own glass. "The harbor deal needs a decision by Friday. You'll have it. And the Callaway situation." Velkier's phone lit up on the table between them. Not a call. A message. One line. From a number marked only by a single contact initial. The kind of contact that doesn't have a name because some information doesn't need to be written down. Rashid watched Velkier's eyes move across the screen. He watched him go very still. That was the thing about Demarian Velkier that most people misread. When something hit him, really hit him, he didn't react loudly. He didn't stand up fast or raise his voice or show it in his face. He went still. The way a room goes still when the electricity cuts out. Everything that was humming underneath, gone. Just the quiet and the change. Rashid had seen that stillness twice before. Once, when someone touched a business partner he'd sworn to protect. Once, when a building full of his men had been taken. Both times, what followed had been significant. He was seeing it again right now. Velkier set the phone down. Face up. Rashid caught a fragment of the message, 3 words. Before Velkier's hand covered it. He stood. No explanation. He didn't reach for his jacket. He just moved, toward the elevator, toward the exit, with the kind of directness that meant all the decisions had already been made before the body started moving. Velkier. He didn't stop. The harbor deal. Friday. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. "You want company?" The doors closed. Rashid sat back in the armchair and looked at the space where Velkier had been. He looked at the untouched glass. He looked at the phone still on the table. Face up, message visible, and he read all 3 words clearly now. He understood exactly why Velkier had stood up. He also understood, for the first time, that whatever this was, it had been running underneath everything for a long time. Longer than any deal. Longer than any territory line. This was personal. Real power doesn't react loudly. It moves immediately, and the speed of it tells you exactly how much something matters. Downstairs, 3 black vehicles pulled out of the private garage. No lights, no announcement, just movement. Toward the mansion on the north edge of the city. Toward a nursery on the 3rd floor. Toward 3 newborns who didn't have names in any record. And toward a maid who shouldn't exist, who'd been hiding from the one person whose scent was already written into those children's bones. The iron gates of the mansion appeared through the windshield. Velkier didn't speak. The vehicles rolled through. The second set of footsteps didn't stop outside the door. They came through it. No knock, no warning. Just the slow, complete opening of the door, all the way, all at once. And then light from the hallway flooding across the nursery floor, and Soren on his feet without knowing he'd stood up. All 3 babies clutched against his chest. His back finding the wall again out of pure reflex. He saw the frame of a man in the doorway first. Tall. Still. The light was behind him, cutting his silhouette sharp against the pale hallway. 2 figures stood slightly back. Staff or guards, he couldn't tell, and they did not come in. Only one man crossed the threshold. He moved into the room like he had a right to every inch of it. Soren's whole chest seized. He knew before he saw the face. He knew the walk. He knew the weight of it, the measured quality of each step, the way the man moved through space like space had agreed ahead of time to make room. He knew the set of the shoulders. He knew the slight tilt of the head. He knew all of it the way you know something that was once burned into you so deep it never came back out. Demarian Velkier. In the flesh. In this room. 7 months of hiding collapsed in about 4 seconds. Velkier stepped further in and looked at the room first. Not at Soren, at the room. The thin blankets on the floor. The supply cloths. The makeshift nest Soren had built in the corner. His gaze moved across it all with the kind of quiet attention that takes inventory without broadcasting itself. Then he looked at Soren. And stopped. Not at Soren's face. At the children. The shift was immediate and complete. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that didn't have a clean word for it. Not shock exactly. Shock implies unpreparedness, and Demarian Velkier was never unprepared. This was more like recognition hitting a place he hadn't known was waiting for it. He stood there and he looked at those 3 infants. At their faces, at their build, at the way the smallest one, Juno, had already turned her head toward him from 6 feet away with her dark, too aware eyes. And Soren watched Velkier understand something. He watched the moment land. The room was completely silent. The babies, who had been crying for most of 3 days, were perfectly still. All 3. Not asleep, awake and still. Caden's fist had loosened. Lena had stopped her constant small movement. Juno was watching Velkier the way she watched everything, like she was already running the numbers. Soren's arms were shaking. He could feel his scent escaping his control. The suppressants had run out yesterday morning and he'd been managing it on will alone, which was not a real strategy, just a thing you do when you have nothing else. And now, in a room with an alpha, with his pheromones unstable and his body still recovering from childbirth and his instincts firing on every frequency at once, there was nothing left to hide behind. The staff in the hallway didn't move. One of them, an older woman, one of the senior maids, Soren had never learned her name, had her hand pressed flat to her mouth. She was looking at the floor. Velkier hadn't spoken yet. That was somehow worse than any version of this Soren had imagined. He'd imagined shouting. He'd imagined accusations. He'd imagined a door slamming open and everything breaking at once. He had not imagined this stillness, this controlled attention, this man standing in the middle of the nursery and simply looking at the children like he was counting something. Then one of the babies moved. Caden, the heaviest one, the one who always frowned, the one Soren had spent 3 nights calling by name in the dark. He shifted in the crook of Soren's arm. His small head turned. His fist lifted, loose and uncoordinated the way newborn hands are, and he reached toward Velkier, instinctively, without knowing, without being able to know. Just a 3-day-old body responding to a signal older than words. Alpha, familiar, present, reaching toward the source the way plants reach toward heat. The room locked. Velkier's jaw tightened. He looked from Caden's tiny outstretched hand to Soren's face, and he said one word. Explain. It wasn't a question. It landed like the end of something, final, flat, the kind of word that doesn't leave room on either side of itself. Soren's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a moment. His throat was working but the sound wasn't following, and he stood there against the wall with 3 children in his arms and that single word still hanging in the air between them. He stopped. Started again. I didn't have a choice. Velkier's expression didn't change. That was the part that cracked something open in Soren's chest. The absolute absence of visible reaction. No surge of anger. No wounded look. Nothing that would have told Soren what direction this was heading. Just those dark eyes, steady and patient and watching him the way a man watches a fire he already knows the shape of. You didn't have a choice, Velkier repeated. Flat. Not agreeing. Not questioning. Just playing the words back the way you set something down on a table so you can look at it from a different angle. Soren's grip on the babies tightened. I did what I had to do. You disappeared. I know. For 7 months. I know. While carrying, Velkier stopped. The pause was brief. Controlled. 3. His eyes moved to the children again. 1 count deliberate, as if he needed to confirm that number was real. Caden, Lena, Juno. 3 faces. 3 sets of lungs that had screamed through the walls of this house and then gone silent the second he entered. 3 infants carrying a bond neither of them had agreed to in any official way. The anger was in there. Soren could feel it, not loudly, not in any way that showed on the surface. It was in the quality of the quiet, in the way Valkyr's stillness had a weight to it now, something pressing outward against the controlled exterior. The kind of anger that doesn't explode because it doesn't need to, because patient anger is its own kind of pressure. I didn't know, Soren started. His voice broke on the second word and he forced it level again. When I left, I didn't know yet. I found out after. And then what? Not a question again. And then I couldn't come back. You couldn't. The word landed like a flat stone. Or you chose not to. Soren said nothing, because the honest answer was both. The honest answer was complicated and layered and lived in a place that still had open wounds, and he wasn't ready to bleed through it standing in a nursery in a house that wasn't his, with no suppressants and no leverage and his body already betraying him on every front. Valkyr took one step closer. Soren didn't move. His feet stayed planted, partly because the wall was behind him, partly because some part of him, the part that had been running for 7 months, had just run out of room. The babies were still calm. That was the disorienting thing. In the 3 days Soren had been alive as their only point of contact, they'd cried more than they hadn't. Feeding, cold, overstimulated, just wanting something he couldn't name, they cried. And he'd held them and rocked them and whispered things that didn't make sense just to fill the silence. But right now, with Valkyr in the room, all 3 of them were settled. Breathing slow. Juno's eyes were still open, still watching. But her whole body was quiet. They felt him. Soren hated that. He hated how clearly true it was. I was afraid, he said. Of me. It wasn't a question this time either, but for a different reason. Valkyr knew. He wasn't asking for confirmation. He was looking at Soren the way someone looks when they've already assembled the picture and are only waiting on one piece, just to see if it'll be the truth or something dressed up like it. Not only you, Soren said. The things around you. Something moved in Valkyr's expression. Not much. A slight shift, a compression, a tightening. He took another step, and now he was close enough that Soren could feel the shift in air temperature, the gravity of an alpha presence that close, the thing his body responded to whether he told it to or not. His instincts pulled in 2 directions. Stay. Run. His feet stayed. The scariest anger isn't loud. Someone had told Soren once, a long time ago. It's patient. It's the kind that already knows it has time. Valkyr stopped. 2 feet between them. He looked at Soren's face. Not the children, not the room, and for 1 second, something passed through his expression that wasn't controlled. Something that looked almost like the far end of relief. Something that had been held back for a long time and was pressing against the inside of a carefully maintained wall. Then it was gone. You ran, Valkyr said. Low, even. And still, you kept what's mine. Soren flinched. Not from threat, from the accuracy of it. From how cleanly that sentence cut through everything he'd been telling himself for 7 months. Every version of the story he'd built that made the running make sense, that made the hiding feel like protection rather than failure, all of it hit the floor in about 2 seconds. He had kept them. He had stayed. And some part of him, a part he hadn't let himself name, had done it because they were also Valkyr's. Caden reached again. That same small, uncoordinated gesture. That same 3-day-old body pulling towards something it couldn't name. Soren looked down at that tiny outstretched hand. Then back up at Valkyr. And he had nothing left to say. Comment below, what do you think Soren should do right now? Stay and risk everything? Or run again, knowing this time he won't get as far? Soren's mouth closed. Because Valkyr had just said the one thing, the exact one thing, that split the last 7 months in half. You kept what's mine. And the worst part wasn't the words. It was that Soren couldn't argue with them. He stood there against the wall and felt the past rushing up through the floor like water through old wood. Slow at first, then all at once, and the room around him started doubling. The nursery, the present, and underneath it, layered and insistent, another room entirely. 1.5 years ago, different walls, different light, Same man. Soren had trusted Demarian Velkier exactly once in his life. Not blindly, he wasn't built for blind trust and never had been. But deliberately, consciously, the way you trust something you've tested from every angle and finally decided holds weight. He remembered the night specifically. Not the good parts, those had been easy, almost uncomplicated, the kind of closeness that doesn't ask for much because it doesn't need to. What he remembered was the other night. The one that came after. He'd been in Velkir's private residence. Not the penthouse, the other property, the one off the main grid, and he'd overheard a conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. Not because anyone was careless. Because Soren had been trained, in a life he didn't talk about anymore, to move without sound when it mattered. Old instincts. Old habits. He'd heard a name. His name. His real name. Not the one he used for work, not the shortened version, the full name that existed in a system he'd spent years trying to exit. He'd heard it spoken by a man he didn't recognize, in a tone that was transactional and flat, the way people talk about assets rather than people. And he'd heard Velkir's response. Not a denial. A pause. That pause had lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds that Soren, crouched behind a door with his heart hammering in his ears, had filled with every interpretation available. Maybe Velkir was thinking. Maybe he was choosing words. Maybe the pause meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. He'd chosen the version that kept him alive. He'd left that same night. Now, standing in the nursery with the distance between them down to almost nothing, Soren watched Velkir's face and understood. For the first time, fully, without the filter of fear, what that pause had actually been. Velkir hadn't been agreeing. He'd been deciding how to handle the man who'd asked the question. The man who'd used Soren's name. He hadn't been selling Soren out. He'd been calculating how to remove the threat. And Soren had run before he could. That was the thing that lived under everything. Not betrayal. Not abandonment. Just a misread. 1 3-second pause, one wrong interpretation, and 7 months of consequence. Sometimes people don't fail you. The world they belong to does. And sometimes you make decisions at 3 in the morning, terrified with incomplete information, and those decisions are the ones you have to carry. Soren felt it move through him, the realization, slow and heavy, the way grief moves when it's been waiting a long time for permission. Velkir was watching him, not speaking. Just watching the realization cross Soren's face, the way you watch something you've known for a while finally arrive somewhere it should have reached sooner. You knew, Soren said. His voice was almost nothing. You knew who sent that man. Velkir said nothing for 1 full second. Then, by morning, after. He'd known by morning. By morning, Soren had already been 3 cities away with nothing but a bag and a direction that wasn't toward anything. Just away. The nursery felt smaller now. The air between them had weight. Juno had closed her eyes finally, her small chest rising and falling in the particular rhythm of a newborn finally surrendering to sleep, and Caden and Lena had followed, the 3 of them draped across Soren's arms like they'd made a group decision to trust the room. Soren looked at them, then back at Velkir. I didn't know, Soren said. I thought. I know what you thought. Then you know why I didn't come back. Velkir held his gaze for a long moment. I know why you told yourself you couldn't, he said. That's not the same thing. The distinction landed somewhere deep and uncomfortable, in the part of Soren that knew the difference between a reason and a story built around a reason. He opened his mouth, closed it. Velkir looked at the children one more time. Something crossed his face. Not softness exactly, but the architectural sketch of it, the outline of what softness would look like if it were ever allowed the full surface area it needed. Then it pulled back. You never trusted me enough to return, he said quietly. Even after, even knowing. It wasn't an accusation. That was somehow harder. It was just the truth placed on the floor between them, taking up exactly as much space as it needed to. Soren had no answer. And from somewhere outside, distant, muffled but unmistakable, came the sharp, flat sound of a gunshot. Then another. Then voices, low and urgent, through the walls of the mansion. Soren's head snapped up. Velkier was already moving toward the door. He crossed the room in 4 steps. Not running, Demarian Velkier did not run, but moving with a speed that made running look like it was missing the point. He reached the doorway and stopped there, one hand on the frame, head tilted toward the sound coming from outside. Soren pressed the babies closer. "What is that?" he said. Not quite a question. His body already knew. Velkier didn't answer immediately. He was listening the way certain people listen, like the information coming in is being sorted and mapped in real time, each piece assigned a location. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone elsewhere, to some calculation happening behind them that Soren wasn't part of. Then he turned back into the room. "Close to the east perimeter," he said. Calm. Like he was reading a weather report. Soren's chest tightened. How close? Close enough. He moved back towards Soren, slow, deliberate, the same walk as before, but with a different quality now. Less waiting. More decided. He stopped a foot away and looked at the children with an expression that had shifted from something complicated into something much simpler. Protective. Clean and simple and total. He reached out, slowly, toward Caden. Soren's first instinct was to pull back. Pure reflex, the same reflex that had been keeping these 3 alive by keeping them pressed against his body for 3 days. But his arms didn't move. His feet didn't move. Some part of him, exhausted, running on empty, body still healing from an experience it hadn't been ready for. Some part of him recognized that this was not a threat. Velkier's hand came to rest, just barely, on Caden's back. One palm. The baby didn't flinch. Didn't startle. Caden, who had spent 3 days frowning at everything, whose small face was permanently arranged in an expression of infant disapproval, he relaxed. His fist uncurled. His breathing slowed into something deeper. Lena, then Juno. All 3, settling under a presence they had no words for and no reason to understand. The room changed. Not dramatically. Not with any single visible shift. But something in the air reorganized. The tension that had been pulling in every direction settling into a different shape. Not safe exactly. Not resolved. But oriented. Like a compass needle that had been spinning finally finding north. Velkier looked up from the children. His eyes met Soren's at close range. And Soren understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that something had just been decided. Not negotiated. Not asked for, just decided the way a foundation gets decided. Underneath everything, before anything is built on top of it. He didn't like it. He also couldn't argue with it, because the babies were calm, because his own body, despite every reasonable objection, had stopped shaking for the first time in 3 days, because some bonds don't ask for permission. They wait for you to stop running. And when you finally do, when your legs give out and the room runs out of corners, they're already there. Velkier stepped back. He turned toward the door, toward the 2 guards who had remained just outside in the hallway, and he said it without raising his voice. Without drama. The way you say something that doesn't require emphasis because it was never going to be a suggestion. Seal the house. The guards moved immediately. No questions. No hesitation. The sound of footsteps spread down the hall in both directions. Fast, coordinated, the movement of men who understood exactly what those 3 words meant. Soren stood in the middle of the now quiet nursery, looked at Velkier's back, looked at the children in his arms, looked at the door, still open, light in the hallway, the distant sound of the house going into lockdown. Am I? His voice came out smaller than he meant. He steadied it. Am I safe here? Or am I trapped? Velkier turned, looked at him, didn't answer immediately. That pause, measured, honest, was its own kind of answer. Right now, Velkier said. Those might be the same thing. Soren held his gaze. Neither of them looked away. Outside, down the hall, a door slammed. Then another. Then the distant but unmistakable sound of the mansion's reinforced shutters beginning to drop across the ground floor windows. Steel on steel, mechanical and final. sealing everything inside and everything outside. The shutters finished dropping. The sound of it moved through the house like a held breath finally let go. Solid, definitive, the kind of sound that means the conversation about leaving is over. Soren stood in the sealed nursery and listened to the mansion lock itself around him and thought, "This is either the safest place I've been in 7 months, or the most dangerous, and I genuinely cannot tell which." Both things were true at the same time. That was the part nobody told you about this kind of life. Velkier had moved to the window. Narrow, high on the wall, with thick glass that didn't open far enough to matter. He stood with his back partially to the room and looked out at the dark grounds below, and Soren could see the tension in his shoulders. Not panic. Never panic with this man. But something working. Something being processed. "They were already watching the house," Velkier said. Soren's stomach dropped. "Before you arrived. Before I arrived." Pause. "That means they knew about you before I did." The words settled into the room one by one and Soren let them arrive. He'd understood, somewhere in the back of his mind, that hiding in one location for 7 months was not a permanent strategy. He'd understood that. But understanding something in the abstract and hearing it confirmed in a locked room with gunshots still echoing in your memory, those are two completely different experiences. "Who?" Soren said. His voice was flat. Not afraid anymore. Past afraid, in the place that comes after fear when fear stops being useful. Velkier turned from the window. Reginald Voss. The name hit like a physical thing. Soren knew that name. Not from direct contact. He'd never met the man face to face, never been in the same room. But he knew the edges of what Voss represented. A rival faction older and wider than most people realized, built on a network that operated in the gaps between the systems everyone else trusted. The kind of operation that didn't compete loudly because it didn't need to. Voss had been looking for Soren. Not because of Soren himself, that was the part that mattered. Not because of anything Soren had done or knew or taken. Because of what Soren carried. Because of who the children were. Triplets born to an Omega and a man like Velkier. That wasn't just personal. That was leverage. Soren understood this the same way you understand something that was always going to be true. Not as new information, but as the confirmation of a shape you'd already felt in the dark. He'd been hiding from two things this whole time. He'd told himself the second one didn't know about him yet. It did. It always had. Running protects you. Someone wise and tired had told Soren once, a long time ago. Until it leads you somewhere you can't escape. He hadn't believed it then. He believed it now. "How many?" Soren asked. "Outside?" "We counted 8 vehicles on approach." Velkier's tone didn't shift. "There are more. 8 vehicles." Soren looked down at the 3 sleeping faces in his arms. Caden, frowning even in deep sleep. Lena, one tiny hand pressed to her own cheek. Juno, perfectly still. Her dark lashes resting against her face like she'd made peace with the world long before the world made peace with her. 3 days old. 3 days old and already the subject of a coordinated approach by a faction that didn't come to negotiate. "They're not here to negotiate," Soren said. It wasn't a question. Velkier looked at him. "No," he said simply. "They're not." One of the guards, a tall man Soren had seen in the hallway, broad shoulders, careful eyes, appeared at the nursery door. He looked at Velkier and gave a small nod. The kind of nod that contains a full report in a single motion. Velkier received it, nodded back. The guard disappeared. Soren shifted the babies in his arms. His left side had gone numb from the position, but he didn't put them down. He didn't think he was capable of putting them down right now. They were the one fixed point in a room where everything else was moving. "I thought if I stayed small enough," Soren said, quietly, mostly to himself. "If I stayed invisible." "They don't care about small," Velkier said. "They care about significant." He moved away from the window. "And these 3, a brief pause, are significant." Soren raised his eyes. The way Velkier said it, not possessively, not as a statement of ownership. as a fact, as something he'd accepted entirely and without condition, in the time it took to look at 3 newborn faces and understand exactly what they meant. That was the part that was hardest to hold. Not the danger outside. Not the locked doors or the armed perimeter or the faction that had been tracking him for months. The hardest part was Valkyr standing in this room looking at those children like they were the most significant thing he'd seen in a long time, and meaning it. A crack of radio static came from somewhere down the hall. Then a voice, low, fast, urgent. Valkyr moved toward the door. Stopped. Turned back to Soren. Stay in this room, he said. Don't move to the windows. Then he was gone. And from somewhere below, from the ground level of the sealed, locked, shuttered mansion, Soren heard it. Not a gunshot this time. Something heavier. Something structural. Like a door that was never meant to give. Giving. Something hit the ground floor. Hard. The whole building shuddered just slightly the way a large thing moves when something large hits it, and Soren felt it through the floor under his feet. The babies startled awake. All 3 at once. Lena immediately pushing toward a cry and Soren pulling her closer before the sound could fully form. His hand pressed gentle against her back. His mouth was already moving, the soundless words, the rhythm, the thing that had no name but worked. She quieted. Barely. Voices below. Running. Commands being called in short bursts that he couldn't make out through the walls. Soren stood in the center of the nursery and ran the math. 1 room. 3 infants. 1 exit. No suppressants. No shoes. He'd taken them off hours ago when his feet had swollen. The window was too high and too small. The hallway was sealed and monitored by Valkyr's men, which meant it was also the only corridor between him and whatever was coming through the ground floor. His mind went to the back stairs, the ones he'd mapped 7 months ago on his 3rd day in the house, because mapping exits was the first thing he did anywhere he stayed. They ran along the east wing behind the linen storage, accessible through a panel that looked like a wall. He'd found it by accident. He was reasonably certain no one else in the household knew it existed. He looked at the nursery door, then at the children. If he moved now, before Valkyr's men repositioned, before whatever was happening downstairs resolved or escalated, he could reach the east stairs, get to the ground floor through the kitchen corridor. There was a service exit at the back of the property, low fence, poorly lit. He could do it. He'd done harder things with less. His feet started moving. Stopped. He stood there in the middle of the floor with 3 newborns in his arms and his body pointed toward the door and his feet completely unwilling to take the next step. Because Juno had opened her eyes. She was looking at him. Not through him the way newborns usually do, still learning to focus. At him. Directly and clearly at his face, her dark eyes steady, with that particular quality she had of appearing to already understand things that hadn't been explained to her. Soren stood very still. Am I safe here? He'd asked Valkyr. Or am I trapped? And Valkyr had said, right now those might be the same thing. Soren had been turning that answer over since the moment it was said. It wasn't evasion, he understood that now. It was the most honest thing Valkyr could have offered, because safety and captivity with a man like that were genuinely not the same category. And yet from the outside, in a locked house with armed guards at every exit, they looked nearly identical. The difference lived in something smaller, in intention, in what the locked door was pointed toward, keeping him in, or keeping something else out. He thought about the 8 vehicles. He thought about Reginald Voss. He thought about a cold road in the middle of the night with 3 infants and no destination and a faction that didn't negotiate. His feet stayed where they were. The door opened. Valkyr came back in. He looked at Soren's position in the center of the room, feet angled toward the door, body halfway between staying and leaving, and he read it immediately. Of course he did. He read everything. Something moved in his face. Not surprise. The opposite of surprise. The expression of a man who'd accounted for this possibility and had decided, ahead of time, how he was going to handle it. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of Soren. Close. If you leave again, he said. Low. Steady. Not a threat, the tone was almost too quiet for threat. More like a statement of physics. Like gravity. You won't survive this time. Soren met his eyes. He believed him. Not because Valkyr was capable of harm, Soren already knew that, had always known that, it was a fact about the man the way certain facts about weather are just facts. He believed him because the danger outside had nothing to do with Valkyr, and everything Soren had just run through, the road, the fence, the service exit, the cold, all of it ended in the same place. In exposure. In 3 infants and no cover and a faction that had been tracking him for months. The truth was simple. He had no move. I know, Soren said. Valkyr watched him for a moment longer. Then he took a slow breath and turned. Not away, but to stand beside him. Side by side, the same direction. Facing the room together instead of each other. The babies had quieted again. All 3, responding to the combined presence the way they'd been doing since Valkyr arrived. Instinctively, without reasoning, their tiny bodies simply recognizing something their minds were nowhere near developed enough to name. Soren looked down at them. Then, quietly, without planning to, I didn't run because I didn't trust you. Pause. I ran because I didn't trust myself to stay. Valkyr said nothing, but his hand, barely, almost nothing, came to rest at the edge of Caden's blanket. Not a claim, not a statement, just there. And downstairs, the sounds of the breach stopped. Complete silence. For about 4 seconds. Then a voice, one of Valkyr's men, radio static cutting through, came through the door. 2 words. They're inside. Inside. Not at the perimeter. Not outside the sealed doors. Inside. Soren's whole body went rigid. He pulled the babies tighter. Already tight. Couldn't get much tighter. But his arms did it anyway. And his eyes went to Valkyr's face, looking for what the expression would tell him before the words arrived. Valkyr's face told him. Serious. Very serious. He moved to the door in 2 steps and had a short exchange with the guard in the hallway. Voice low, words fast. The compressed language of men who've trained together long enough not to need full sentences. Soren caught fragments. East corridor. Ground floor. 2 confirmed. Maybe more. 2 confirmed. Inside the sealed house. The shutters hadn't stopped them. The reinforced doors hadn't stopped them. Whatever Reginald Voss had sent tonight was not a standard approach. Valkyr came back in. He stood in front of Soren and for one moment, just one, the controlled surface dropped. Not dramatically. Not into anything that looked like fear. Into something more honest than fear, actually. The face of a man who is looking at the thing he intends to protect and running the calculation of how to do that under conditions that just got significantly harder. 3rd floor is secure, he said. My men have the stairwells. We hold this floor. And if they get past your men, Valkyr met his eyes. They won't. But if, Soren, 1 word. The name landed differently than it had any right to. Soren hadn't heard his real name in Valkyr's voice in over a year. It didn't sound like the past. It sounded like right now, like a hand reaching through everything that had accumulated between them and taking hold of something that was still there. I have you, Valkyr said. Simple. No drama. No performance. Just the words, placed down like they weighed something and he was willing to carry them. Soren stood very still. And then, without deciding to, without planning any version of this, he stopped holding the distance. The physical distance, the internal distance, the 7 months of careful separation he'd been maintaining even from inside this room. He stopped holding it. He didn't move toward Valkyr. He just stopped moving away. And in the language of people who've been running, that was everything. Valkyr looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned and gave the order. Not loudly. Not for the room. To a specific man in the hallway, in a tone that Soren had never heard from him before but recognized instantly. The tone of a declaration, not a command. These 3 are mine. Anyone who comes through that door will answer to me personally. Silence in the hallway. Then movement. Fast, organized, the sound of men repositioning with full understanding of what had just been staked. Soren looked at the children. Caden, finally at peace. His frown smoothed out in sleep for the first time since birth. Lena, her fingers wrapped loosely around Soren's thumb. Juno, still watching, always watching. Her eyes moving slowly between Soren and the doorway and back, as if she was tracking something the adults in the room hadn't yet put words to. Juno reached out her small hand and gripped Velkir's finger. Tight, the way newborns grip things. Without decision, without knowing, just instinct and biology and whatever ancient knowledge lives below thought. Velkir looked down at that hand. And for the first time since he'd walked through the nursery door, something in his face broke open. Just slightly. Just enough. The corner of his mouth. The line of his jaw. Something that, in different circumstances and a different room, might have been the beginning of something that needed a name. Soren saw it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some bonds don't ask for permission. They wait. They wait through the running and the hiding and the misread pauses and the cold roads and the 7 months of survival. And when the running finally stops, when the room runs out of exits and the children choose both of you simultaneously without knowing that's what they're doing, the bond is simply there. Already finished. Already whole. Just waiting for the people inside it to catch up. Below them, the house had gone completely silent. Not resolved. Not over. Silent in the way a held breath is silent. Soren counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, from the east stairwell a sound. Not Velkir's men. Different footsteps. More of them. Heavier. And in the hallway outside the nursery, Soren heard one of Velkir's guards say something in a voice that had lost its steadiness for the first time all night. 3 words. That's not Voss. Velkir's head came up. What? That's not Voss's people. The guard's voice came through tight, almost pressed down. The vehicles outside, the markings, that's not Voss. That's static. A sound like something hitting the floor. Then nothing. Soren and Velkir looked at each other across the nursery. And whatever calculation Velkir had been running, whatever plan had been assembled and held in place for the last hour, Soren could see it being reevaluated in real time. Could see the moment it was set aside entirely. Because whoever was coming up those stairs right now was not the threat they'd prepared for. It was something bigger. Something that hadn't announced itself. Something that wasn't here for leverage. Juno's grip on Velkir's finger tightened, and the footsteps kept coming. If the story moved something in you, if you felt every second of that room, drop a comment below and tell me, what do you think is coming up those stairs? And share this with someone who needs a story that doesn't let go. Subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel carries stories that stay with you. New chapters drop regularly, and you do not want to be the last one to know what happens next. Hit that bell. Share this where it'll reach someone who needs it. And keep your comments coming. Your thoughts here inspire more people than you know.